The Automated Podcast.
So welcome back to another episode of the Automated Podcast with your host, Marc Verbenkov. So this week, I'm actually really happy to bring on Dhoya Snijders and Serf Doesborgh, two researchers from the Rationale Institute in the Netherlands. So if you haven't heard about this institute before, we do go into it during the podcast, but briefly, it is an organization that conducts research on the socially relevant aspects of science and technology, which is used to inform both the Dutch government and the general public on really the pressing technological impacts of our current times. So on the podcast today, the impacts of virtual reality, this is mostly tackled by Dhoya, and augmented reality, mostly tackled by Serf, are explored as we are seeing a boom in the use of these technologies really in the last several years. So some quick bios, and then we can jump right into the discussion. So Dhoya examines the effects of information technology on society. So he is currently doing research on surveillance technology, the ethics of augmented and virtual reality, of course, which is relevant for this episode, and societal questions concerning radioactive waste projects. His doctoral research at the Free University of Amsterdam was about the societal consequences of environmental policy and was carried out in both the Netherlands and South Africa. And after working as a consultant on digital transformation, he was employed by the Netherlands Study Centre for Technology Trends, the STT, and wrote, among other things, the publications Data is Power, Big Data Scenarios, and Long Live Learning. This is about learning, technology, and the future. So Serf, on the other hand, is working on the theme digital society and focuses on societal issues regarding virtual, augmented reality, and voice assistants, which I hope he will come back onto the podcast at some future point to actually talk about voice and voice assistants, which I have talked about on the podcast once or twice before. So during his master's in the European Studies on Society, Science and Technology, the S program, he explored the societal issues regarding the automation of labor, which was actually where we met, as our theses actually overlapped in a number of areas on this. So I've had a number of guests come onto the podcast to discuss the future of VR, but I especially looked forward to this discussion as we were really able to look at some of the societal impacts of these emerging technologies. So I hope you enjoy the discussion as much as I did. Thanks for coming onto the podcast. It's been a long time trying to schedule this, so I'm really excited to have you guys both on the podcast today.
Thanks for having us. Nice to be here.
Absolutely. So kind of the main way that I like to start off these interviews is to ask you what initially got you interested in VR and AR, which will be the main subject of today's discussion. So I think Dhoya, you'll be focusing a little bit more on VR and Serf on AR. So maybe we can start off, Dhoya, you can give your interest or your background regarding VR.
So I've been working on this theme of the digital society for a very long time. I used to work for the Dutch Center for Technology Trends and was very much engaged also with these new kind of developments. At the Rathenau Institute, we have been doing a big study on the responsible embedding of new technologies in our society, because the Senate asked us this. So that the first chamber, the Senate in the Netherlands, was looking how to do this. So this urged us to do this large study called Urgent Upgrade, and we assessed 8 emerging technologies, also AR and VR. And what we found at the end of the study is that there's so much public debate about the other technologies going on, about artificial intelligence, about robotics, about Internet of Things devices, but not too much about VR and AR. So that really made us study this technology more closely and got us really focused on it. And I think the last couple of years, there have been so many investments going on to this sector that it's really been booming. At the same time, we've been seeing quite a lot of research being done on this and also on the ethical sides. But somehow this whole research domain hasn't spilled over into the public debate and into the political debate. So we as an institute thought this is where we should come into the discussion.
And Serf, how about yourself for AR?
Yeah, I think the introduction that Dhoya did for Rathenau is a very good one, because that's similar for me. So I'm also a researcher at the Rathenau Institute, and there I'm working on 2 projects, and the first one was AR, and the other one is voice technology. So we're talking about Alexa and Siri and Google and that kind of stuff. But in a similar way, I'm working with the Rathenau with that similar goal and that similar mission, but then working on AR. But I think in regards to my own interest outside of Rathenau, where it started off was, I think, in Amsterdam, that there was some sort of event, and there I started using a VR game for the first time, which was called Super Hot, I think.
Yep.
And there you had to, it was kind of a shooter game. And I saw all these people playing that, and then they were ducking on the ground, and they were sometimes jumping even. It's like, what's going on here? So after trying that and really immersing myself in the VR stuff, that was really interesting, yeah, really immersive, cool experience. So I thought that was super new. And later on with AR interests, I think like for a lot of futurists or people that are busy with new technologies, I got interested by a series of Black Mirror that was really interesting for the societal aspects, because they had some AR interest in there as well.
Yeah, for any of you listeners who haven't seen the Black Mirror episodes, I think I've mentioned it a couple times on the podcast that it's highly recommended. I also have gotten interested in AR and I guess a little bit VR to a certain extent through those very interesting episodes that they put out.
There's one called Striking Vipers, which is on VR specifically. I thought it was quite interesting. It's about two male friends playing a computer game, but in the game, they're one of them is a female character, and they kind of get entangled in all kinds of ways, not only in the fighting game, but also in a romantic way. And then the whole discussion is about how does this play off in real life? So what kind of effects do social relations in the virtual domain have on our physical society? Which is a really interesting topic, but also a way that they explored it in.
Yeah, I think this is a theme that we'll be discussing a little bit today, right? Like how these technologies really do have an impact on the way that interactions and dynamics between people happen in society. I do want to maybe back up a little bit, just for the audience that doesn't know about the Rathenau Institute. Maybe you could give a short introduction to what it is the Institute actually does, because I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, sure. Serf, you can always check or chip in. We are a Dutch institute based in The Hague, and we advise on science, technology, and innovation. We're a governmental think tank, completely independent but funded through government. And we advise mainly the parliament. So parliamentarians can ask questions about state of the art of new technologies and their role in society. And we give updates about this and do studies into this. But it's not only the parliament, it's also other government organs. And we try to really reach out to society at large. Also often in our studies, also the VR study, we take kind of a consumer or a citizen perspective. And our institute likes to not only be called a research institute, but it's a research and dialogue institute. We use that term in Dutch. We really try to stimulate public debate.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's right. Like for the discussions that we want to emphasize in the public debate, and really give a good foundation so that the discussions are happening on a solid research level, so that we can have the good discussions that are needed in society.
I think that was always the thing that I kind of cued in on regarding the Rathenau Institute, and that made me quite interested in following a number of the reports that you guys have been publishing over the last couple of years. It's really that public dialogue that needs to continually happen as these technologies continually advance and get more powerful and have greater impact. So I'm happy to have you both here today to kind of discuss that with VR and AR.
I think because you've got an international audience, it's interesting to say that many countries actually have these kind of organizations. We call them parliamentary technology associations. And there's a network called EPTA. You can look it up. Mm-hmm. And nearly all, at least European nations, have got an institute like this, which are publishing reports on this. So if you find what we say interesting, you might want to look up what's being said in your own country or region.
I was always wanting to have one from Spain because I'm based in Barcelona. It's just unfortunate that there's a bit of a language barrier there. But I'll definitely link that network in the show notes of the episode if there are other audience members that want to look into it. I did want to kind of start off with looking at how VR and AR have been moving more into the consumer domain over the last couple of years. I myself personally have only really gotten into using VR over the last year and a half. I was wondering if you guys had some insights as to why we're now seeing these technologies really move into the consumer domain compared to before.
Yeah, I think I'll start out by addressing this for VR. I think there's different things going on. We know VR already for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, there's been research on it. But the last 5 years, I think, firstly, the gaming industry has been looking for the next frontier. And secondly, the social media industry has been looking for the next frontier. And I think especially that second one, there's a big push by, I think Facebook is very much in the lead, who have invested really billions into this technology. And Facebook's founder, Zuckerberg, his goal was to have 1 billion people using VR on a kind of Facebook-like social platform within a couple of years. And he really thinks and believes that VR will change the way not only in which we play, but also we communicate and work. And this kind of dreams that not only Facebook, but also Microsoft and Sony and Samsung and a couple of these tech giants have been introducing a lot of money into the tech. And because of that, the technology is becoming smaller and more wearable and much more powerful and much more comfortable and much cheaper. So this is actually a good month to do this show because I think there's a new Facebook device out, the Oculus 2, which I think is a couple of $100 and is actually a really powerful standalone device. So I think because of that, it is at the within reach for millions of users, and the content is gaining traction as well. So we'll see a lot more of this, I think.
Yeah, I think for AR, it's a little bit similar, but I think some people might know AR a little bit less than VR because VR became very popular with the gaming industry, of course. But with AR, it also depends a little bit on the definition. But you might not know that it's already existing in many places. If you look at, for example, projectors that are used, for example, in Sydney Opera House, which is also a sort of a virtual layer that comes over a building, which could be termed as AR as well. And then you have, of course, some of the glasses like Google Glass that didn't become a very big success. Why that is and what's happening with that, we can talk a little bit later about that maybe. But Google Glass, for example, didn't become a consumer product right away, but Google Glass Enterprise is there. And that says a lot already that it has actually moved into the professional domain. So when you're talking about the smart glasses in that regard, it's really moved not to the consumer side, but more to the professional side. And there's most of the development happening. Also, mostly because of the cost, but also the investments that are being done there. You might think that AR is not that much in the consumer domain. But of course, that's also not the case because I think everybody knows the game of Pokemon Go, which is definitely an AR game that has had a lot of impact and was downloaded like 1 million times in the first few days anyway as well.
Yeah, and the filters, like every smartphone that is coming out at the moment has these AR filters, which are very popular on Snapchat and TikTok and all these kind of social media platforms at the moment, which are also versions of the AR.
Right. So maybe more than people think, these both of these types of technologies are already available and kind of permeating the society that we live in. I think connected to this, one of the main things that we thought before recording to discuss are kind of the ethical and public issues regarding both of these technologies, specifically for consumers. And I think the report that came out from the Rationale Institute really dove into this. Maybe if I could get both of you to discuss some of the kind of the key ethical and public issues of these kind of emerging technologies.
Before we do that, I think it's very important also to distinguish VR and AR in that regard, because there is, of course, a difference between VR and AR. And what I would say is that for VR, like we had, of course, a lot of, before VR existed, you have the gaming and you play a game on your PC or you go into the digital world in that way. And with VR, you are really immersed into a virtual reality. And in comparison, AR is then more of an digital layer that is put over our own physical environment. So digital aspects come into our world in that regard. And I think that's a really interesting distinction to make because that really defines both of these aspects and have a different impact on society as well.
Yeah, I think we really see this, the umbrella term we use is immersive technology, and we see this immersive technology as a next step in information society. So there's a bit of a big claim, but I'll just explain what we mean. We really see kind of this evolution of the way in which we interact with our computers. And first, our computers were stationary; their desktops are on our desks and in our offices. Then, of course, they have gone mobile with smartphones, tablets. And now we really see that this next step is emerging in which the whole experience of the virtual world is becoming immersive. So we're moving beyond the keyboard and the mouse and these flat screens to having technologies in which we become actually integrated in the digital world. And the digital world, especially in AR, is becoming integrated in our world. And at the same time, we see a kind of next step in information processing. First, text and documents, work process being digitalized, then social networks, and now basically the rest of the world, including how we move, what we say, where we are, what the world looks around us. So yeah, VR and AR, at least in techno utopian dreams, are really a next step of going beyond what we're doing at the moment in our digital society.
Yeah, there's this Klaus Schwab, who I believe was one of the high-ranking, if not the chairman of the World Economic Forum. He coined the term of the fourth industrial revolution, right? And one of the kind of key points in that initial coining of the term was this blending or merging of the digital and the biological. And I think, Dhoya, you just touched on that perfectly. This is really like an age where, yeah, the biological and the digital are really merging, and VR and AR are maybe some of the more powerful tools to enable that to happen.
Yeah, exactly. If we can go into the ethical and societal issues by explaining a little bit more what kind of these technologies are, because we think they're basically doing three things at the same time. So firstly, they're digital data machines. All these machines are collecting data about our surroundings and about us as persons. They're analyzing this, they're rendering it and processing it. But at the same time, they are building up virtual worlds, or in the case of AR, virtual layers, which are attached to our physical world. And then thirdly, they're kind of interface technologies. So they give us as users access to this virtual world in which we can navigate through them. But this interfacing is also that they're kind of changing our perception of the world around us. So the technology is becoming more and more intimate. It's coming closer to us, so close that actually it is just only a few millimeters away from our eyes. And thereby, digital stimuli are immediately modifying what we see, but also what we're hearing and what we're feeling. And all these kind of three different tasks that these machines are doing at the same time come with different ethical issues. So especially if you look at the digital data machine, to build up a good and very realistic virtual world, you need a lot of data. You need to know exactly what's going on around someone, but also how people are moving, and this comes with all kinds of privacy issues. So the mass storage and processing of especially VR data raises all kinds of new questions regarding what privacy exactly is and how we can understand it and what kind of regulations we need for it.
Yeah, and I think that this is something that is becoming more and more obvious to maybe the general public. I can only refer to the audience so many times to the Social Dilemma documentary that just recently came out, which I think really touches on maybe not so much the VR and AR impact yet, but certainly the problems of algorithms and AI within social media that is, again, kind of capturing our data and using it to feed us advertisements. Serf, I don't know if you want to add to what Dhoya was saying regarding AR.
Well, I can really, with the last thing that you said, I can really add to that because with that regards to advertisement and also some sort of manipulation that is happening and through the screens or through social media and that stuff, things are sold to you. The interesting case is that for AR, these aspects are being brought into the real world. So in regards to, for example, a game of Pokemon Go, that is actually a really cool game that people can play around, catch Pokemon in the real world, go outside, and in that regard, meet each other and have a lot of fun. On the other side, there are companies that are paying Niantic, which is, by the way, a startup from Google, incubated in Google, that they pay Niantic to, in fact, have some of the monsters near their businesses. So, for example, if McDonald's pays some money, then they have more monsters there, and actually more people will visit McDonald's in that sense. So the advertisement model, the manipulation model, becomes ingrained into real society now as well, and that is the interesting case of AR, that the digital aspects are coming into the real world.
Yeah, that's really interesting and I guess scary at the same time for people that haven't heard about this, right? There's this capability of nudging people more towards whatever it is that you want, whether it's, buying another Big Mac or anything else. Is there anything else that we need to discuss regarding the key ethical and kind of public issues? Maybe some other examples to make it a little bit more tangible for the audience. I do also want to get into kind of the regulation side of things, but maybe we can dive into a couple examples which might make it a little bit more, as I said, tangible for the audience.
Yeah, sure. With VR, but actually also in AR, there's also a big question of what it does to people's perceptions and if they can still see the difference between reality and the virtual domain. So there has been a study in which kids were asked what they had been doing the last couple of days, and they described their having been with orcas. Well, actually, they had been viewing orcas in a VR setup. So it is a study by Bailey and Bailinson, and they found that it's just difficult for people, and especially children in particular, to distinguish between virtual experiences and regular experiences. So this is kind of a form of dissociation, and it's got very much to do with, as we call this technology, it's very immersive technology. There's a high level of emotional engagement, and also that can become so strong that people do not see the difference between reality and the virtuality.
That's pretty crazy, actually. I guess because VR is, especially consumer VR, is so relatively new, we don't really know the kind of long-term impacts of this disassociation between the digital or the virtual and the physical, the real world yet, do we?
No, and that's actually a really important point to make, that they have been around for a long time, but they haven't been used so much by these amounts of users. So they're actually young research domains monitoring and evaluating what these technologies are doing to our senses and to our physiques. So we think also it is very important to start up new research lines to monitor this and to see what exposure to this kind of technology for a long time does to you.
Yeah, I can only imagine, right? If I'm still old enough to remember living without a cell phone, especially a smartphone, and when smartphones were starting to be used by the majority of the population, there were lots of people ringing the warning bells of the potential kind of problems in the future, and that's just with mobile phones, right? They're not completely immersive as VR and AR are, so I can only imagine that the consequences of using these technologies in the future will be even more so than the mobile phones that we use today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we also found in the use of VR, there were a couple of social risks. We've seen like online harassment and so on. But just as you're saying, these are more immersive, that the forms of harassment and aggression also have a stronger effect. So this poses a real risk. Yeah, there was one case which I found quite interesting surrounding this platform called Quiver. I don't know if you know about it. There was a journalist using it, and she describes how someone is harassing her, and it's very different than the chat room, because there's actually a physique just in front of you and touching you all over. But I found that the platform reacted very well, and they created this new filter in which the users got these personal bubbles. And as soon as hands touched came towards the body, actually the hands just disappeared. So one could not touch each other and grope each other anymore in the virtual world. So I think these kind of developments are very good, but you see that at the moment, these kind of initiatives come from the platforms themselves, and we don't have kind of societal rules or norms around this kind of situations.
Maybe we can then jump into kind of the regulatory or the future regulations that need to be imposed, right? You're saying that, say, the platforms are the ones that are, I guess, taking in user feedback and making the changes that need to be done in order to make them, I guess, safe and comfortable spaces to be used. But has the Rationale Institute or yourselves kind of postulated some interesting regulations that would be useful for AR and VR?
Yeah. Well, to start out, we really choose this governance approach. So we've got this broad approach to it, and we think that not only policymakers should be involved in regulating and forbidding things and allowing things, but we believe really that society should be involved, and industry and science and technology. And what we see with these technologies is basically that there just has not been much public discussion. So journalists have not been involved yet. Have not been any kind of programs such as around AI on ethical guidelines, around norms and legal frameworks. So we would say also to policymakers, we should launch kind of a national and maybe even an international debate on the ethics of AR and VR. And we see that with AI and with other technologies, these kind of broad debates, including kind of interviews on podcasts that go international, they kind of slowly but surely establish these frameworks for integrating these technologies into our society, because you'll have citizen platforms, and you'll have policymakers, and you have the tech all coming up with different approaches to it. And slowly but surely, we will get an understanding of what we need to inform people, but also to protect them from the risks of technologies. And as I was saying, science and technology really needs to be involved. So we really need to study those long-term effects of these technologies as well.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree further with you on that. Serf, do you have anything to add to regarding augmented reality?
Yeah, I think it's in that way, of course, similar to really know what we can talk about and what we should talk about with regards to AR. And in that sense, I can give some more examples on the issues that AR brings up, because then there also the discussion starts, and we can take it from there with the public and all the people that we can talk to. So again, with the definition of AR, it's the two worlds merging, right? So we have the rules of the physical world, and you also have the rules of the virtual world, and they are combining, are being combined. And there you get sort of a hybrid environment, a hybrid reality. And both of the rules that are present in both worlds then mingle, and that can form chaos or or some problems in a certain way. So for one example, we have layers and AR that starts off with ourselves and our humans, us as humans. So self-image can be switched up because of Snapchat and all the filters that we have in our phones. And also the beauty filters are often now standard in our phones and always there, which has, of course, can have mental implications and cultural implications of how we should look like. But the bigger impact maybe is also because AR is influencing the world, right? So the public space and the public environment. Again, the example of Pokemon Go is that there are physical objects being placed in the real world, and there are rules in the real world that you cannot go into a hospital for nothing, and you cannot go to, for example, a cemetery, or certain spaces have certain rules. And if there are people and children getting in there finding Pokemon, that's of course getting a problem. And then it's even harder sometimes in the case of here in The Hague, where there was a problem in the dunes that we wanted some of those creatures, virtual creatures, out there. It's really hard for people to make legal action towards these bigger companies and to actually get the virtual creatures out of there. So that are some of the issues. And with the public space, it's also, is it still a public space if we are putting AR in there? So we want to really keep the public space, meaning that it's accessible for all. But if somebody puts, for example, an artwork somewhere in a park, or really changes the whole atmosphere, and people are coming towards that space because of that, because of these digital layers, well, it's not only accessible for the people that have those phones or those glasses, and the rules of that environment change as well. We did also one experiment ourselves. We made a sort of an art piece, a game, which was called Mirror World, where it's kind of a photo tag game, and we invited students to play it in the station in The Hague, the central station. And suddenly people were running around taking pictures of everything, and then getting back to the people to see if the picture that they were taking was in fact of the place that the person was first there taking the picture. So suddenly a public space becomes gamified in that way. And again, that poses bigger questions of how we should really go about public spaces. And I think that's where the discussion needs to be for one aspect of AR.
There's one legal scientist, he's called McClure, and he has also said, like, maybe we should have these do not locate me registers. Like in Holland, you've got registers if you do not want to be called by advertisers and so on. But he was saying maybe we should have this for AR as well, because in these virtual platforms, you can seduce people to come to a certain space. So maybe you want a specific policy to say, like, me as a user or as a municipality, you can decide which spaces are accessible and which ones are not. But I think Serf's points on AR actually are really fascinating about also commercialization, because there's so much importance to having public spaces with a public character in which we can just be free of interference of states and companies. And this is, of course, a risk that your beaches and your nature reserves and also your bathrooms and so on can all be commercialized just in a second by putting a virtual layer on it. And at the same time, we shouldn't only look at the risks, but you can also turn a forest into a classroom or into a memorial space or into whatever you want. There's huge opportunities for this technology to change the way that we embrace and experience our space.
Yeah, so we were talking about the public space already, right? And I think there has already been a lot of discussion about similar aspects for AR, for example, with Google Glass. And there it's a thing not really of the public space being taken over or adapted, but of course there is an influence of cameras. So in that sense, there is not now the privacy issue of cameras and surveillance in the overall scheme, but there's these, you can say, like these little big brothers everywhere, which was also, of course, the issue of the Google Glass, and also one of the reasons why it didn't succeed in that way. So, of course, and in that sense, the discussions are already taking place, and I think that's a good example. And that's also why companies, again, can learn from these experiments and also know that discussions with the people and with institutions and other people are really valuable, because then they don't fall into similar mistakes, and then they actually maybe later on they can actually have the proper implementation of these technologies and in the way that we all want to have them.
Right, but I think also with that, there's a tremendous risk. No, like you were saying, the eye tracking with Google Glasses, but this is actually needed to be implemented into the VR headsets for many of the games or some of the programs to work. You know, if we take the recent discussions about data accumulation in, say, Google or Facebook or other large tech companies, right? The amount of data that these companies are getting about us simply by having a smartphone or the desktops around us. I can only imagine that with this other layer of biometrics that VR and AR are going to be able to take from us and give to these companies, it's just going to give them that much more strength or power to nudge us or I don't want to say force us, but maybe certainly allow us to use their products more. And as the social dilemma shows, feed us advertisement, which doesn't benefit society at all.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and the social dilemma is very much still the digital society or digital world as we know it. But for this VR and AR worlds to work, you really want a lot of data also about how people's fingers are moving, and indeed with infrared cameras, how their eyes are moving, because that makes the experience much more naturalistic and immersive. Because we don't have those keyboards and mouses anymore, you're tracking kind of all movements. And also what now is the problem with kind of Facebook is launching a new social media platform. They've killed their others, and now this Horizon is coming out as a beta version. But what you still see is there's critique on all these cartoon characters walking around in these worlds. People cannot associate enough with them. So they're also doing with Codex Avatar. I don't know if you have this project, this project. It's really interesting. They're making really real life scans, kind of digital clones of people in which they, can scan your whole body and also all your mimics, so that you can also have a virtual copy of yourself, which people can really recognize as you and interact with as you. And I think especially in AR, this poses also huge problems, because it's not only the data of the user that you are monitoring, like in VR, who is maybe in his own room in his own house, but in AR it will be in the public space. So it's also other users that you're tracking, but also non-users that have not consented to having their data registered and tracked.
I do see that the time is dwindling down a little bit. Maybe we can go to kind of the central theme of the podcast regarding the impact on jobs. I don't know if both of you want to take a kind of a stab at how VR and AR, as you perceive it and as has been written maybe in the reports, how these technologies will be impacting jobs.
Yeah, I can maybe start in regards to AR, because we have some case studies that we've done and talked to people in the enterprise and in the professional setting that are actually using AR. So it is in some regards definitely impacting jobs, but it's changing the job, which is the most part of it. And the biggest part of that is that it's an information switch, where first off a lot of stuff was information that was presented in 2D, and now it's more in holograms or in 3D. So in the case of neurosurgery, we talked to a researcher there, and he was really positive about the aspect that now when they make, for example, brain scans, MRI scans, it's basically additive pictures that build up a picture, right? So you scroll through the brain when you are trying to find a tumor, and there you can actually find where it's actually located. But then now they can actually make a 3D model of that. And when they are then talking with the patient, they can put the brain literally, but then of course the virtual one, on the table and look at it, talk about it, which really adds to the understanding of the patient and the explanation of that. And in similar ways, that's also happening with construction, where first off, some people wanted to build a bridge, but the construction of that bridge is really difficult. Where do you place it? What are the layers that need to be done to build it? But now, instead of all these 2D drawings, you have a 3D model where you put on the HoloLens and you see the actual bridge being placed over the river and exactly where it's located. So again, it's the information process that is really helping, and which gets to an overview that makes the whole process a little bit easier.
Yeah, it's I've had a number of guests come on to talk about the impact of, say, VR, but this seems to be what you're saying here, Serf, is very applicable to many different domains, right? So it's kind of a cross impact across all these different domains and industries. And I think some of these examples that you just gave kind of give a good picture as to how useful AR will be for specific jobs in the future. Dhoya, do you want to discuss maybe some of the impacts of VR?
Yes, I think similar. It can really have an empowering effect on users and also in work environments. Like being able to study a three-dimensional model of a child's heart in VR can really help surgeons perform more successful operations. And the same is for, of course, it's also a cheap way to simulate dangerous situations for maybe soldiers, or expensive situations for maybe engineers that have to do underwater engineering. So in that sense, there's really great ways to kind of use it in educational and healthcare and judicial settings. And they are also interesting because they can kind of simulate the world, but also tweak them. You can do it again and again, and at the same time, you can kind of manipulate it so that maybe I've seen therapies in which people learned how to conquer their fears, and they had kind of virtual users, avatars, all kind of looking at them or looking away from them so that they could experience kind of this kind of peer pressure. And there's so much possible in these worlds. And at the same time, of course, there's kind of fortunes and misfortunes which are being handed out by these technologies. What we also saw, especially in literature, actually not so much in our case studies, is that de-skilling can also be involved, like in kind of warehouse settings. These AR glasses can be used to simplify all kind of tasks, which make it easy for non-experts to do kind of jobs, but they can also be gamified, and gamified to such a level that people kind of use lose their cognitive autonomy, that they have the idea that they are not really working themselves anymore, but in a sense, they're automated themselves, to stay with the theme of this podcast.
Right.
So, are we, with this kind of AR glasses, automizing people? Well, I don't think, we haven't found actually much empirical evidence for this, but it is a risk. It is a very potential scenario which we should mind for.
Which also goes into the monitoring and, again, the data aspect, of course, right? So everybody that is wearing a smart glass in, for example, a warehouse has the potential to be monitored. So it's really the discussion with the people that implement it. How do you implement it? What kind of data do you want to gather? And how do you go forward with implementing these technologies?
Yeah, I couldn't agree further with that. I really think that as on this podcast, and especially with you guys, we're discussing the emerging technologies and really kind of the aspects that aren't too well known yet. So yeah, thanks very much, guys, for bringing a little bit of elucidation to VR and AR with regards to the ethical and kind of public issues and the regulations and such. I know that you are going to be having a AR report published in the next couple of weeks or months?
Yeah, next couple of weeks.
Great. And there is a VR report that goes into what we discussed a little bit more substantially. I'll link up in the show notes the link to the report as well as to the Rathenau Institute. But if anybody wants to get in touch with you guys or follow your specific work, where should people get in touch with you?
Well, both our names and email addresses are on the Rathenau site, so I think that's probably easiest if you just go there and look up Dhoya Snijders or Serf Doesborgh.
Perfect. Easy enough then. Great. Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming on, and looking forward to reading that AR report in the future.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So thanks for listening to this week's episode. If you want to support the podcast, you can leave a like or a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you want to get in touch, feel free to do so over Twitter or LinkedIn by searching for Automated Podcast. On the website, automatedpodcast.org, you can leave a comment on any of the episodes, read the transcripts, and look at the sources I use in all of these episodes. There are also blog articles and additional resources and information on this topic, and podcast if you are looking for more. See you next week.
The Automated Podcast.